Russell Munson has loved flying and photography since he was a kid. Today, the combination produces extraordinary aerial photographs.
When I first started flying, and just looking at the ground, and one reason that I do love to fly so much is from what you see. It's just a perfect vantage point. But at around 500 feet above the ground, there is a shear zone, for lack of a better expression, but it's you're still close enough where the objects are identifiable and everything is real, but just high enough and detached enough where it starts to become abstract too. You start seeing abstract patterns.
Not the tail of a whale, just low evening sun on the sand dunes. Russell Munson's particular genius is that he sees and records shapes and forms that emerge briefly. Wind-blown holes in the ice, a farmer's field overrun by a flood. Floating above the landscape, Munson captures a river cutting a black path through the trees. Scenes visible only from the air.
The plane I use is a Piper Super Cub, and it is a derivative of the old Piper Cub, the old J3 Cub, which originally came out in the 30s. It's a Jeep with wings. The lenses I usually use, probably the 105 millimeter more than anything else. The 180 I also use at 2.8. And wide angles, I go as wide as, I can go to 24 millimeter and not hit any part of the airplane.
The principle of a gyroscope's stability is essential for every pilot.
The same principle, the stabilization principle, works into gyro stabilizers that are used for camera mounts, big motion picture mounts in helicopters. And the one I use is a Kenyan gyro stabilizer, which is just a little thing that screws into the tripod socket on the camera. And there are two gyros in there mounted at cross axes, and it's electrically driven. I use mine on the airplane electrical system, but it also has a battery pack. And it stabilizes the camera in pitch and in yaw. And those things are twirling at something like 15,000 RPM or so. And it's worth about 2 stops in shutter speed. And I find it, I've used it on the ground also where you don't have room for a tripod and you have to be very steady, but in the airplane it's wonderful because any turbulence or anything, the camera tends to stay steady just like the toy gyro does. And the airplane can bounce, and I wasn't going to buy one until I wanted to make sure that it would give me shots that I couldn't get otherwise, because I don't like equipment, I don't like any extra equipment. And sure enough, it just increases or you get fewer pictures ruined by blur than you do without it. So it increases your percentage of shots. So to me, that was worth it. I only fly during times when the light is good, which to me is, from sunrise to maybe an hour after sunrise, and then an hour before sunset to sunset. In the wintertime in northern latitudes, you can extend that a little bit because the sun never gets very high. It's always at a low angle anyway. And I go out a lot of the times just hunting, just as you take your camera and walk down the street and shoot street scenes. And so I'll fly around an area that I haven't been, or even a familiar area. And once I see something that attracts my eye, then I just fly around it and see what angle I want. And all the time, I'm a full-time pilot, I'm not even picking up the camera. And once I find it, then I set up the racetrack pattern, which is to pilots like an instrument holding pattern. I think in this kind of work, everything should be as standardized as possible. So I don't, shoot one there and then shoot another one there, and the airplane's going this way and that way, and I'm not looking for other airplanes. That, to me, is crazy. So it's very standardized. It may take longer to do it. And I may orbit an area for an hour sometimes, just getting everything right, because the work I tend to do is so critical that if you gain 50 feet, you just have another thing. So it has to be very precise. So for aerial photography, you just hate to shoot through windows. through plastic. I mean, you just have a, what, a $500 lens shooting through a $25 piece of plexiglass. It doesn't make sense. So the Super Cub opens up both clamshell door on the right, and then it has a big sliding window on the left.
The result of this day's shooting, a waveline that mimics the human face. Russ Munson finds hidden pictures everywhere he looks.
There was a shot that I did on Long Island where somebody in a truck had done me a wonderful favor. They had driven across a snow field and apparently had gotten stuck and tried to back and fill, and then the little footprints going off and then coming back, where they apparently managed to get the vehicle out. So it was probably a very frustrating day for them, but to me they made a beautiful flower, which I was lucky enough to come upon and photographed. And that is part of the magic of photographing from this perspective to me, because things become, they are what they are, and you have a photograph of it, but they have become something entirely different. And so the subject transcends itself and becomes something else. And to me, that's what a photograph is all about.